and we have high expectations of that. So again, I hope the other place, the Senate, understands this urgency and passes this bill so that it can land on the Governor General's desk in short order.
Resuming debate, the honourable member Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honour to rise in this place to speak to Bill C-70. It is a bill, and certainly to have a foreign influence registry is something that we have wanted to see, but we also recognize that there are concerns that overbroad application of such a registry could in itself inadvertently result in stigmatization of diaspora communities within Canada. This bill needs to be carefully administered, and much of what remains of what we're passing in an expedited fashion, a breathtakingly expedited fashion, I may add, is to be left to further regulations. That there are still a lot of questions as the bill moves forward. I have to say that having, of course, had the right, as any member of this place did, to have said no to unanimous consent, could have insisted that we have greater study. I have to say that I wish we'd had greater study, but the timing and the consensus, and I am always inspired when I see members across party lines work together, because we don't see it often enough. So I know the member for Vancouver East and the NDP, working with the Conservative and very honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills. We're working together, as was the member for Cowichan and Malahat Langford, also NDP. So I stand here today very pleased that we're going to see this bill passed into law. But I am increasingly unnerved by the numbers of groups who have approached, I'm sure all of us, but certainly as the member for Saanich Gulf Islands, I've received numerous concerns from the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, from the National Council of Muslims of Canada, from Democracy Watch, and their points are important. But we have, especially given the climate in which we found ourselves and the numerous delays in implementing changes to actually confront foreign interference, I think we have perhaps moved too quickly. And I'm going to say that for the record, that I feel concerned that a number of these concerns are quite valid. For instance, when you consider that at Section 20, Sub 3, that penalties for violating the Act, and we still have to deal with the fact that there's some vagueness in how we are describing these offenses, can amount to it as much as imprisonment for life. These are very serious consequences and have a potential to have a charter violation problem, as identified by some of the lawyers and legal organizations that have reviewed the bill and are saying, now, was it wise to so infringe on the time in committee? The honourable member for Cowichan and Malahat Langford mentioned some amendments that the NDP would have liked and the Bloc didn't like, but that's how democracy works in committee. Well, as Greens, we were given a very short window, so small we weren't able to submit amendments in time to even have our amendments voted down in the expedited fashion in which we've studied this bill. So I want to put on the record that we'll continue to monitor it closely. It is an improvement, as mentioned, that from the first reading version that this bill would receive parliamentary review 5 years after passage. It'll now be much sooner. But I think we should collectively, having made the decision that it was very important given the degree of efforts at foreign interference in this country, which are well documented, the expedited passage of the bill is important because we're aware of the threat. And we're increasingly aware of the threat. I should pause to say we're increasingly aware of the threat because of some excellent work that's been done by colleagues from all parties in this place in the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. Their work is critical, and they have also been calling for measures such as those that are in Bill C-70. As we go forward, though, in the development of regulations, as the bill is further implemented, let's be mindful that this bill has received precious little study. I think it's important to say that we have had, I don't think I've ever seen a bill with so many substantial changes to critical areas of law pass so very quickly as this one. The concerns are also not just that the bill has potentially charter violating implications, as raised by the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, but I was taken by the commentary from Democracy Watch that we've left too many loopholes. If we want to deal with foreign interference, why have we still left it possible for such issues as a foreign agent using lobbyists as proxies and slipping under some of the scrutiny that would apply in other contexts? There are a number of points that Democracy Watch has made in relation to loopholes that should be closed. We're looking at certainly concerns about the way in which this will be rolled out. We do hope that it will receive royal assent, get through the Senate, but we have asked the Senate also to expedite this. So again, I'm left disquieted. As much as I support implementing a foreign influence registry, that we keep track of the activity of hostile governments, that we actually pay attention to the fact that we've gone perhaps recklessly quickly in bringing the bill forward and getting it all the way through to third reading and over to the Senate. That, I have to say, I am concerned about, even as I had the ability to object, and one member objecting ends unanimous consent. I didn't want to take that step, but I want to put on the record that we are going to have to be very careful from here and take every opportunity to ensure that we are not violating charter rights, that we are not creating additional hazards for members of diaspora communities that we had not considered before we moved so very quickly. Now, why are we concerned about foreign interference? Well, it's very clear that foreign interference has actually, as in the case of the honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills, resulted in actual threats and intimidation of family members, things to which any member in this place should not have to be concerned as a Canadian citizen, or for that matter, a foreigner visiting our shores. We are not the only country, obviously, that is now recognizing that foreign governments interfere in our domestic affairs. Recently, as of course, reading over the report of the National Security Information Committee of Parliamentarians and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, put me back in mind. It was so long ago, I'd almost forgotten that 1983, it was European money that interfered in the Conservative Party leadership race in 1983, with Karl-Heinz Schreiber delivering a lot of cash to the anti-Joe Clark forces to secure a nomination of a more palatable to the forces from Europe providing that money in nominating and electing Brian Mulroney as the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party. That was 40 years ago, and we still haven't closed that loophole even with this law. We need to pay a lot of attention to how foreign governments interfere in our affairs. I take the point from the member from Cowichan Malahat Langford and wish to agree that it's one of the bill's strengths that it is agnostic as to whether this is a foreign government we like or a foreign government we don't. I think it's important to ensure that Canadian democracy for Canadians operates in the interests of Canadians. We will obviously have to be taking more steps going forward, but certainly certain countries rise up in our concerns based on CSIS concerns, based on our intelligence operations, and those countries we know, and they are named and understood to us as being interested in undermining Canadian democracy. But Canadian democracy is also undermined if we ignore our own values, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, in making sure that we haven't gone too far with draconian measures in an effort to ensure we control foreign interference. I know this speech reflects my ambivalence, and for that I apologize. I know that I am very pleased that we will have a foreign influence registry. I would like to ensure that it's effective, but it also doesn't accidentally trespass into areas that we will later regret. And as I have 2 seconds left, Madam Speaker, I'll thank my colleagues for the time to address these issues on C-70.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member Cowichan Malahat Langford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague from Saanich Gulf Islands for her remarks tonight. Part one of this bill has pretty significant upgrades to the CSIS Act, particularly with how CSIS handles its data set regime. And of course, that's following a fairly scathing report from NCIRA, which showed that CSIS had regularly broken its legislative guidelines with respect to data sets. Madam Speaker, we're being asked as legislators to put a fair amount of trust into the executive branch and into our intelligence agencies, and I have no doubt that they do great work. But through you, Madam Speaker, is my honourable colleague satisfied that our existing accountability mechanisms, our oversight mechanisms, such as NCICOP, such as NCIRA, such as the Intelligence Commissioner, is that sufficient enough so that maybe we can avoid in a number of years from now not reading another NCIRA report about how CSIS has breached its statutory guidelines? Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you to the honourable colleague for Cowichan Malahat Langford. Whenever we have a CSIS report that makes accusations and they are earth-shattering, and we as parliamentarians assume that CSIS is right, I always remember that sometimes CSIS is wrong. And the accusations and the information provided to members of cabinet in that era that told members of cabinet in this country that Maher Arar was a bad actor and it was okay to let him have extraordinary rendition to be tortured in another country. CSIS is not always right, and we must ensure that we protect Canadians and those who are on our shores from the actions of such a dreadful episode as that, and I'm not sure that we haven't left ourselves open to that happening again.
Questions and comments? Your Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for her speech in this House and her insights on this bill. I wanted to speak to her about, or ask her about, the provisions now to have the CSIS Act regularly reviewed every 5 years. Given that this legislation is almost 41 years old, one of the things that I always found challenging was the fact that there hadn't been a significant review to not only keep pace with the changing threat nature of foreign interference, but security and privacy issues all around. I would look forward to her comments on the ability to now review this important legislation, given her comments.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
I thank the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, and I do think it's important to be able to have periodic reviews. But I will not forget that what we've done in the Harper era, we gave CSIS kinetic powers that they had not had before. I think that's a mistake, but we've left it that way. We have the RCMP was supposed to be the ones to act on intelligence, and intelligence gathering was the exclusive job of CSIS. We still have silos in this country, and we need to break them down between intelligence gathering, law enforcement, and also make sure that the executive branch doesn't have too much power over the way in which the intelligence and kinetic activities are orchestrated. More parliamentary involvement, and I certainly think the work of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians is a welcome step forward in this direction.